The signal came at 0300 hours, as it always did. I was already awake, already sitting in the dim amber light of the observation deck with my coffee going cold in my hand and my eyes fixed on the mottled gray-brown surface of KX-7 rotating slowly below us. I had stopped pretending to sleep on the 22nd day. There was no point. My body had synchronized itself to the signal, the way some people synchronize to sunrise, some biological alarm clock rewiring itself around the one event that mattered. And at 0258 every morning, I would find myself blinking at the ceiling of my bunk with my heart already beating faster than it should. 31 days in orbit, 31 signals received. Tonight would be different. I did not know that yet, but some part of me, the part that had been listening and recording and decoding for a month, the part that had begun to feel the signals the way you feel music before you consciously hear it, some part of me knew. My coffee was colder than usual. I had been sitting longer than usual. I was waiting with quality of waiting I had not felt before, a tautness behind my sternum that I might have called dread if I had been less honest with myself about what it actually was. It was anticipation. Pure, terrible, magnificent anticipation. The console beside me chimed softly. 0300 hours, ship standard, which we still measure in Earth hours out of habit so deeply ingrained that even Captain Dario Reyes, who had been born on the Ganymede station and had never once set foot on the planet that gave us our time, referred to midnight as midnight without any sense of irony. Earth was 63 light years behind us, a pale memory wrapped in sentiment, a place most of our 8-person crew had left years ago and thought about with a specific tenderness reserved for things you love precisely because you have escaped them. I thought about it sometimes. The weight of a real atmosphere pressing down on your skin. The sound of wind that wasn't recycled through metal ducts. The smell of soil. But not tonight. Tonight, I was thinking about the signal. It came. It always began the same way. 3 pulses in a pattern I had eventually recognized as a kind of header, an announcement, the electromagnetic equivalent of clear your throat before speaking. Then the body of the transmission, which was never in any human language and never in any coding system designed by human hands, but which had a grammar to it, a syntax, a rhythm of repetition and variation that my brain had spent 30 nights learning to hear the way you learn to hear the beat beneath an unfamiliar piece of music. And then it would end. Clean. No trailing noise. No signal degradation. No bleed over static. It simply stopped, the way a speaker stops when they have finished saying exactly what they intended to say. I had published nothing. Commander Yael Ostrov, our mission commander and the most politically careful person I had ever worked with, had asked me not to. Not yet. Not until we understood more. I had agreed, though the agreement had cost me something I couldn't quite name, some fundamental scientific reflex to share, to submit for peer review, to place my findings in the great collective river of human knowledge and watch them be carried forward. 30 nights of data sat in my personal encrypted archive, annotated in my own shorthand, understood, partially, by no one but me, what I had understood so far. The signals were cumulative. Each night's transmission built on the previous one, the way you build a sentence by adding words, the way you build an argument by adding evidence. Night 1 had been simple, a series of mathematical relationships, prime numbers and geometric ratios, the kind of thing that SETI theorists had dreamed about detecting for centuries, the universal grammar that any intelligence capable of mathematics would recognize. Night 2 had been more complex, a layer of information nested inside the mathematical framework, like meaning inside syntax. Night 3 had added another layer, and so on, each night compounding. By night 15, I had understood that whatever was transmitting was not simply broadcasting. It was teaching. By night 23, I had understood what was teaching, and I had sat alone in the observation deck for 4 hours afterward, not moving, my cold coffee forgotten, staring at KX-7's dead surface and feeling the ground of my scientific understanding shift beneath my feet the way ground shifts in an earthquake, not opening up to swallow you, just reminding you that the solid thing you had been standing on was never as solid as you thought. What the signal was teaching was this, that the assumptions underlying every definition of life that human science had ever produced were assumptions, just assumptions, not laws, not truths. Assumptions built on the only example of life we had ever known, our own, our biosphere, our chemistry, our liquid water and carbon chains and narrow temperature ranges. And that these assumptions were genuine life, what a description of one wave is to the ocean. Life did not require what we thought it required. Life required only one thing, and that one thing was not carbon. It was not water. It was not a stable temperature, or an atmosphere, or a particular arrangement of proteins. It was time, specifically duration, continuity, the unbroken thread of a pattern that persisted and changed and responded to change. Life was not a chemistry. Life was a verb. And on this dead, airless, 400-degree swing rock, something had been that verb for longer than our sun had existed. That was what I had understood by night 23. Nights 24 through 30 had been elaborations, details, the filling in of a picture whose outline I had only begun to see. And tonight the signal was different. Not structurally. It began the same way. The 3-pulse header, my heart kicking up into a faster rhythm the moment I heard it. But the content was not a new layer added to the growing architecture of what had come before. It was a single, simple transmission, simpler than anything I had received since night 1, and it was not a statement. It was an address, coordinates, precise, unambiguous surface coordinates, expressed first in the mathematical language the signal had established over 30 nights of careful instruction, and then, and this was the part that made my hand shake so badly that I spilled the cold coffee across my knee without noticing, translated into terms I would recognize. Latitude and longitude calculated relative to KX7's rotational axis, expressed in a coordinate system that matched exactly the mapping system our own survey probes had used when they had scanned the surface. It knew we had mapped it. It had waited for us to map it. And now it was telling us where to go. Below the coordinates. A time. 12 hours from now. Not expressed in Earth hours. Expressed in the signal's own mathematical language, but equating to 12 hours from now with a precision that allowed for no ambiguity. And below the time, one more element. The simplest thing in the entire transmission. 3 words rendered in the mathematical shorthand the signal had spent 30 nights teaching me to read. Come, be patient. I sat with those words for a long moment. The console chimed the end of the transmission. The observation deck was silent, except for the soft machinery breath of the ship around me, the hum of the recyclers, the distant percussion of something in the engine room that Chief Engineer Pyotr Hansa had been meaning to look at for 2 weeks. KX. 7 rotated below me, impassive and gray-brown and completely, entirely, demonstrably dead. I went to wake the captain. Reyes took it better than I expected, which is to say that he sat at his desk in his quarters for 3 full minutes without saying anything, reading my annotated transcript of the night signal, his dark face absolutely still in a way that meant he was thinking very hard and very fast, and processing more than his expression was showing. He was a compact, careful man of 61, a career deep space commander who had been running research vessels for 30 years and who had the quality, common to the best of them, of being genuinely unshockable, not because he lacked imagination, but because his imagination was large enough to have already considered most possibilities. He had not, I suspected, considered this one. Coordinates, he said finally, precise ones. They match our own survey grid. It knows we mapped it. Yes. Another silence. 12 hours. From the time of transmission. So roughly 11 hours and 40 minutes now. He set down the transcript. He looked at me. His eyes were very dark and very level. What do you want to do, Nora? I loved him for asking me that first, before logistics, before risk assessment, before the 17 other questions that were already forming behind his eyes. He asked me what I wanted because it was my discovery, and he knew it, and he was that kind of captain. I want to go, I said. I want to go down there, and I want to be at those coordinates in 11 hours and 40 minutes, and I want to see what is there. That is what I want. And what are you afraid of? I considered lying. Not seriously, but the option presented itself the way options do, a door in the hallway of your thoughts. And I looked at it and walked past it. I'm afraid that what's there will be real. I'm afraid of what it means if it's real. I'm afraid that after this there's no going back to the way science was before, and I'm afraid that I'll go down there and I won't be adequate to what I find, that my mind won't be big enough. He nodded slowly. That's a good fear to have. Is it? It means you understand the stakes. He stood. Wake the others. Full briefing in the common room in 30 minutes. They were not all as calm as Reyes. Dr. Marcus Webb, our geologist, who had been the first person aboard to tell me flatly, on day 3, that the signals were almost certainly a natural phenomenon, and that I was projecting pattern onto noise, sat across the common room table with his arms folded and an expression on his face that I recognized as the outer shell of fear with anger painted over it. Marcus was brilliant and stubborn and had built his career on the principle that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, which was a principle I shared and respected, but which in his hands sometimes became a shield rather than a method. "You're telling me," he said, "that a geologically dead body with no detectable organic chemistry has spent a month teaching you its language so it could invite you to tea. I'm telling you what the signal contained. And I'm telling you that a month of sleep deprivation combined with the specific psychological pressure of isolation in deep space produces a well-documented phenomenon called apophenia, which is a perception of meaningful patterns in random data." Marcus, that was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Tan, our pilot, sitting at the end of the table with a mug of something hot between her hands, watching Webb with the patient. Slightly dangerous expression she reserved for conversations she intended to end. "Nora has 30 nights of recorded data that she has been working through with rigorous methodology. You've seen the transcripts. I've seen her interpretations of the transcripts, which she has walked us through in detail twice, with the underlying mathematical framework laid out step by step." Sarah set down her mug. "You found 2 errors in 30 nights of analysis, both minor, both corrected. The interpretation is still subjective. All interpretation is subjective at the frontier. That's what the frontier is." I let them argue for a while, partly because I was too tired to intervene effectively, and partly because the argument was not really about the data. It was about what the data meant. And that argument was a version of an argument that had been running for the entire month, a low-grade current of tension that had occasionally spiked into something sharper during long shifts and short sleep cycles. Marcus was not wrong that I had been sleep-deprived. He was not wrong that isolation distorts perception. He was wrong that these facts were sufficient to explain what I had found. But his wrongness came from an honest place, and I did not want to damage him by dismissing it too quickly. Dr. Priya Okafor, our mission physician, and also, because research vessels are economical in their personnel allocation, our biochemist, had been quiet since the briefing began. She was the youngest member of our crew at 34, 12 years younger than me, with a stillness to her that I had initially read as shyness and had gradually come to understand was simply economy. She did not spend words on things that did not require words. When she spoke, people listened. She spoke now. "I want to ask Nora something." Everyone looked at her. Webb stopped mid-sentence. "Nora, in 30 nights of signals, has there been anything, any element, any phrasing, any implication that felt threatening?" I thought about it carefully, the way she deserved. "No," I said. "The opposite. The signals feel pedagogical, patient. There's something about the rhythm of it, the way each night's transmission waits for the logical completion of the previous night before adding the next layer. It feels like someone who has been doing this for a very long time and is very good at it. Someone who has done it before." Priya said, "Not just for us." The room was very quiet. "That's one interpretation." I said, "What do you think of it?" "I think it's the most plausible one, yes." More quiet. Webb unfolded his arms. "What's the surface temperature at those coordinates right now?" That was Hansa, the engineer, speaking from back of the room where he had been leaning against the wall with the particular stillness of a man who is listening much more carefully than he appears to be. Pyotr Hansa was 53, barrel-chested, laconic, and possessed of an engineering intelligence that expressed itself almost entirely in practical questions. 212 degrees Celsius, I said. "But it's curly local night at those coordinates, and the rate of cooling is steep. By the time we'd land, roughly 10 hours from now, it should be closer to 40, warm but survivable in full suits. Atmosphere? Negligible. Nitrogen traces, some sulfur compounds, nothing breathable. Radiation? Manageable with standard shielding. The scans have always shown that. Surface stability? Our geology scans show largely consolidated basaltic rock at those coordinates. No significant volcanic activity within 1,000 kilometers. Hansa nodded slowly. He looked at Reyes. I can prep the Ariadne for descent in 4 hours. The Ariadne was our surface lander, a squat, heavily shielded craft designed for exactly these kinds of hostile environment landings. We had sent it down twice before on atmospheric research missions to 2 other bodies in this system. It worked. Reyes looked around the table. I want to vote, he said. Not because this is a democracy, but because whatever we decide, I want everyone to have chosen it. He went around the table. Hansa, go. Priya, go. Sarah, go, with noted caution. Dr. Tomasz Quishin, our astrophysicist, who had barely slept in a week and had been running calculations on the signal's electromagnetic properties without stopping. Go. Absolutely go. There was no rational alternative. Dr. Aiko Yamamoto, our communications specialist, who had worked alongside me on the signal analysis for the entire month and who had been my closest ally in the debate. Go emphatically. She had been ready to go since night 15. Marcus Webb looked at the table for a long moment. Then he looked at me. If it's real, he said slowly, if this is genuinely what you think it is, then going is the only defensible scientific choice. He paused. I'm going on record that I think the probability of a natural explanation remains significant. Noted, Reyes said, but... Another pause, shorter. Go. Reyes looked at me last. I had already said what I wanted. He just nodded. Then we go, he said. 4 people down, Nora, Sarah, Marcus, Hansa. Priya and Aiko stay on the Meridian with Tomasz. Tomasz, I want you monitoring every instrument we have during the descent and the surface visit. Priya, prepare medical support protocols for whatever we might encounter. Aiko, maintain continuous communication with the surface team. He stood. Everyone get some sleep. For hours. That's an order. I did not sleep. But I lay down in my bunk and closed my eyes and thought very carefully about what I was afraid of finding and what I hoped to find, and how close those 2 things actually were to each other. The Ariadne smelled like heat sealant and recycled air, and it was smaller than I always remembered it being when I hadn't been in it for a while, which was a reliable experience of small spacecraft. They shrank in memory and ambushed you with their claustrophobia when you returned. Sarah ran through her pre-flight checks with the focused economy of motion she brought to every piloting task, her voice low and steady as she talked Hansa to the engine status, and Marcus strapped himself into the seat beside me and stared straight ahead with the jaw-set expression of a man who has decided to do something frightening and is now committed to not discussing it further. I pressed my face to the small porthole beside my seat and watched KX-7 growing. It grew the way planets always grew on approach. Slowly, interminably slowly, and then all at once, the visual shift from a disk to a surface happening faster than your mind could prepare for it. From orbit, it looked dead in the way geology textbooks look dead. Interestingly inert, full of information about processes that had ended long ago. From the Ariadne, dropping to the thin atmospheric traces with a mild shudder that Hansa watched with narrowed eyes and assessed as normal, it began to look dead in a different way. It began to look like a place. The surface was complex. From orbit, the scans had shown broad plains of basaltic rock, ancient impact craters, ridge systems that marked the ghost of tectonic activity long since cooled to nothing. From closer, you could see the texture of it, the way the rock was fractured and refractured by the extreme temperature swings. Crazes of fine cracks running through the dark stone like veins in marble. The whole surface a mosaic of fractures held together by the slow geological patience of compression. There was no dust. Without significant wind, and without any organic decomposition to create fine particles, there was no loose material to be blown anywhere. The surface was hard and cracked and clean. No color. Not really. The stone was dark gray-brown. The shadows black in a low sun. The highlights a kind of bleached silver where the rock face caught the angle of the star. A red dwarf, smaller and cooler than Earth's sun, which made the light on KX-7 a deep amber that made everything look slightly sepulchral, like a world photographed through an old filter. It was beautiful in a way that dead things can be beautiful, The way you can see the beauty in a fossil or a dry bone, beauty that makes you sad without quite knowing why. Landing site in 4 minutes, Sarah said. Surface temperature currently 47 Celsius at coordinates. Dropping. Atmosphere check, Hansa said. Nitrogen trace, 11%. Sulfur dioxide trace, 0.3. Oxygen effectively 0. Standard suit protocols apply. Any signal activity? I asked. Aiko's voice came through the comm, steady from the meridian above. Nothing on any frequency, nor a clean silence. Of course. The signal always came at 0300. We had 10 hours until then. Whatever was going to happen, it was going to happen before the next transmission window, and I was not entirely sure what that meant or whether it mattered. We landed. The Ariadne set down with solid percussion that I felt through my seat and my boots simultaneously. A good landing, firm and clean, and Sarah exhaled slowly and methodically, powered down the descent engines with a practice sequence that could have been a ritual for how automatic it was. The silence of the surface settled around us, which was not actually silence. The ship made its own sounds, the cooling metals, the recyclers, the gentle hum of the comm systems, but had the quality of silence in a way that a room after an orchestra has finished playing has the quality of silence. Suit checks, Hansa said. We suited up. The suits were designed for hostile environments. Fully sealed, self-contained atmosphere for 12 hours, thermal regulation that could handle temperature ranges from -100 to +150 Celsius, radiation shielding rated for environments significantly more hostile than this one, comm systems, biometric monitoring. They were also white, which seemed inappropriate. We would look like astronauts in a history documentary, stepping onto the surface of a dead world. I suppose that was exactly what we were. The airlock cycled. The outer door opened. I went first. The surface of KX. 7 was not what I expected, and I had expected a great deal. What I had not expected was a sound. There was no wind, no atmospheric movement worth measuring. And yet when I stood on the surface and something shifted in the heating of my suit, I heard something. Not through air conduction. Nothing so conventional. Through the rock itself. Conducted through my boots into my body. A deep, slow vibration, subsonic, below the threshold of hearing, but fell in the chest the way you feel a bass note in a concert hall. It was rhythmic. Barely. Like a heartbeat in slow motion. One beat every 3 or 4 seconds. Felt rather than heard. I stood still. I listened to it with my body. You hear that? I said. Marcus was beside me. He had his geological scanner out already. Because Marcus always had his geological scanner out, it was his comfort object. He looked up. I feel it. Seismic. Check. He checked. Microseismic activity. Well within normal parameters for a body this size with this thermal cycling. Could be the rock expanding and contracting. He paused. But the regularity is unusual. Unusual how? Natural thermal cycling produces irregular patterns. This is, he checked the scanner again, 0.83 second pulse interval. Consistent, plus or minus 0.02 seconds. Hansa had both feet on the ground now. I feel it too. It's not the ship? Sarah asked. She had descended last and was running her own diagnostic check on the Ariadne's landing struts. No, Hansa said. Ship's on isolation mounts. This is coming from the ground. We stood there for a moment, the 4 of us in our white suits in the amber light, feeling the slow subsonic pulse of KX, 7 beneath us, and the coordinates were 2.3 kilometers north-northeast by our NAV systems, and the sun was low in the sky, still dropping to a horizon that was more jagged with distant ridgelines and smooth, and I thought, come, be patient, and I started walking. The others fell into step without discussion. The walk took 40 minutes, not because the terrain was particularly difficult, though it was not easy. The fractured rock made every step a considered one, the crazed surface offering edges and lips and sudden shallow drops that required attention, but because I kept stopping. I kept stopping because things kept demanding attention, not living things. There was nothing alive here in any sense that my biology training could confirm, and yet the fracture patterns in the rock, from orbit and from the initial surveys, they had looked random. Thermal cracking, impact stress, the standard geological vocabulary of a dead world. Up close, Walking through them, I began to notice that the fractures had a directionality. Individually, each crack could be explained by local stress patterns. But when you looked at a broader swath of surface, when you held the pattern in your mind and rotated it, they described something, not language, not imagery, but something organized, something that had a center and a periphery, something that pointed. Everything pointed north-northeast, toward the coordinates. I did not say this aloud. I was not sure I trusted what I was seeing. I made notes in my suit's recording system, precise notes, coordinates of specific fracture patterns, photographs, measurements. I was a scientist on a strange world, and I was going to behave like one if it killed me. Nora, Hansa, behind me, quieter than I expected from him. I turned. He was standing at the edge of a slight depression in the rock, maybe 4 meters across and half a meter deep, looking down into it. I walked to him and looked. The depression was not an impact crater. The geometry was wrong. Too regular, too shallow, the edges too gradual. It was as if the rock had simply subsided here, gently, forming a broad, smooth bowl. And at the bottom of the bowl, the rock was different, darker, not gray-brown, but almost black, with a quality to its surface that was hard to describe. Not reflective exactly, but somehow more responsive to light, as if it absorbed and re-radiated photons on a slightly different timescale than the surrounding material. "What is that?" I asked. Hansa was already running a scanner. He said nothing for 30 seconds. Then, "The material at the bottom of this depression is the same basaltic composition as the surrounding rock. Visually, it looks different." "Yes." He paused. "The crystalline structure is different. The standard basalt around us has a disordered crystalline matrix, which is typical. This material has a highly ordered crystalline matrix, almost perfectly ordered. Natural crystal formation? Crystals form with ordered matrices. Yes, but this degree of ordering over this area?" He shook his head. "I've never seen this. Not naturally." Marcus crouched at the edge of the depression. He was quiet for longer than Hansa, his scanner moving across the dark material in slow, systematic passes. I knew what he was doing. He was looking for an explanation. He would find one if there was one to find, because Marcus was relentless, and I respected that, and I waited for him. "The ordering isn't homogeneous," he said finally. "There's a gradient, more ordered toward the center, less ordered toward the edges." He looked up at me. "That's not how crystals form. Crystal ordering propagates from a nucleation point and decreases with distance from the point. This is the inverse." Meaning either this is a crystalline formation process I have never encountered and which is not in any geological literature I've read, or he stopped. Or he stood. His face was composed very carefully. Or something ordered it from the outside in. No one said anything. I photographed the depression from 6 angles. I took a surface sample from the edge where the transition between ordinary basalt and the ordered material was most pronounced, sealing it carefully into a collection container. Then we walked on. There were 7 more depressions, each one unique in dimension and precise location, but all sharing the same quality. The dark, ordered material at the bottom, the gradient from ordered center to disordered edge, the same impossible crystalline architecture, each one slightly larger than the last. Each one positioned so that, looking back at the previous one from the current one, the alignment was exact, a line of breadcrumbs leading north-northeast. By the time we reached the 7th depression, I could see the destination. It was a structure. I use that word because it is the only word that fits, but I want to be precise about what I mean. It was not a building. It was not a machine. It was not any shape that human engineering had ever produced, not because it was alien in the science fiction poster sense, with aggressive geometries and metallic sheen, but because it was the opposite of those things. It was organic looking the way that crystals are organic looking, in the way that a snowflake is organic looking. Not because it was alive in any biological sense, but because it had the quality of something that had grown according to rules rather than been constructed according to a plan. It rose from the surface to a height of perhaps 8 meters. Its base was wide, perhaps 20 meters across, and it narrowed as it rose, not in simple taper, but in a complex recursive narrowing, branches splitting from the main column, and then splitting again, each sub-branch tapering to a point, the whole structure resembling a fractal rendered in dark, perfectly ordered stone. Except it wasn't stone. Not entirely. The crystalline material from the depressions was present here in quantity, forming the entire structure, and this close to it the not quite reflective quality of the surface was more pronounced, and in the low amber light the structure seemed to breathe with its own slow luminescence, a quality that I knew my instruments would categorize as thermal re-radiation, but which my eyes kept interpreting as something else, as attention, as the visual signature of something that was aware of being. Looked at, hands made a sound I had never heard it make before, a slow, low exhalation that was almost the shape of a word, but didn't quite become one. Sarah stood with her hands at her sides and her head tipped back, and I could see in her posture something I recognized from the moments just before she made a difficult landing. Perfect physical stillness as the processing happened inside. Marcus was scanning. His hands were very steady, and his face told me nothing. I walked toward it. "Nora," Sarah said. Not a command, not a warning. Just a note of my presence. "I know," I said. I walked toward it. The subsonic pulse was stronger here. Not dramatically stronger, not the kind of intensification that would register as alarming, but I could feel it more clearly. Feel the rhythm of it in my chest, in my teeth, in the liquid of my inner ear. One beat every 3.4 seconds. I had timed it during the walk. The interval had been consistent over the entire 2.3-kilometer journey, and it was consistent here. And the word my mind kept reaching for was not geological and not mechanical, but biological, and I kept pushing the word away because my instrument had confirmed and reconfirmed what the orbital scans had shown, which was that there was no biology here, no organic chemistry, no DNA or RNA, or protein structure, or cell wall, or any of the thousand things we looked for when we looked for life. And yet, I stopped 4 meters from the structure. This close, I could see the surface detail. The crystal lattice was visible to the naked eye, an interlocking geometric pattern of incredible precision. Each unit cell of the crystal oriented exactly relative to its neighbors, and the whole surface of every branch in the main column covered in this pattern, which did not repeat exactly anywhere. Every section was slightly different from every other section. The way handwriting is slightly different in every stroke, but still recognizably the same hand. The structure radiated heat, not alarmingly. My suit's thermal sensor showed surface temperature slightly above ambient, 42 degrees Celsius versus the ambient 41, a difference so small it almost wasn't there. Almost. And the distribution was uneven, warmer at the center, cooler at the branch tips, which was another inversion of what you would expect from simple thermal retention. I reached out and put my gloved hand against the surface. The pulse stopped. In the moment it stopped, the world felt profoundly wrong. The vibration had been so constant over the past 40 minutes that my nervous system had incorporated it and forgotten it. The way you forget traffic noise when you live on a busy street. And now in its absence I felt suddenly exposed. The way you feel when traffic noise stops at 3 a.m. and you wake abruptly into silence without knowing why. Then it started again, at a different interval. Faster. One pulse every 2.1 seconds. I took my hand away. The interval remained at 2.1 seconds. "Did you feel that?" Sarah asked. "Yes." My voice was level. I was proud of how level it was. It changed its... Yes. Behind me, I heard Marcus's scanner emit a series of sounds I had never heard it make before, short, rapid beeps that indicated it had found something it did not know how to categorize. "Nora," he said very quietly. I did not turn around. "Tell me." "There's a thermal bloom happening in the center of the structure, not at the surface. Internal." His voice had the quality of someone reading from an instrument they don't entirely believe. Heat is being generated internally, not retained from the environment. And it's... A pause. It's patterned. The thermal pulses match the seismic pulses. What generates internal heat in an inorganic crystalline structure? Sarah asked. "Piezoelectric effect," Hansa said, unexpectedly, from close behind me. "Pressure on a crystalline lattice generates electrical charge, which generates heat. If the lattice were large enough and the effect were..." He stopped. "But that would require an external pressure source. There's nothing applying external pressure. Unless the crystal itself is generating the pressure, Marcus said, unless it's contracting and expanding rhythmically, internally. The silence that followed was the silence of four scientific minds arriving simultaneously at the same conclusion, and collectively choosing not to say it first. I said it. It's doing it on purpose. No one argued with me. I spent the next 4 hours at the structure. I will try to convey what those 4 hours were like, but I am aware that any account I give will be inadequate. Not because the experience was so overwhelming that language fails, though it was, but because the most significant parts of it were not dramatic. They were quiet. They were the accumulation of small, precise observations that I had been trained to make, applied to a subject that my training had not been designed for. And the impact of those observations came not from any single moment, but from the weight of them together. The way that individual snowflakes carry no particular weight, and yet mountains of snow can stop you. The structure responded to proximity, not to my proximity specifically, or to any of our proximities individually, but to the aggregate of our presence. The total amount of living biological mass within what seemed to be a radius of roughly 5 meters. When all four of us stood within that radius, the pulse interval shortened. When one of us stepped back, it lengthened. When Hansa stepped forward to replace the person who had stepped back, the interval shortened again. The structure was measuring something about us. And whatever it was measuring, the four of us together were more interesting than three. The structure responded to frequency. Aiko, monitoring from the Meridian, began running tests on my suggestion, transmitting various signals from the ship toward the surface and watching for response. The structure was indifferent to radio frequencies, to microwave, to visible light. When she transmitted in the frequency range that the nightly signals occupied, the structure's surface temperature rose by 0.3 degrees Celsius, and the pulse interval shortened by a further half-second. And something happened to the crystalline lattice visible on the surface. The orientations of the individual unit cells shifted, infinitesimally, in a synchronized wave that ran from the base of the structure upward, like a shiver. The structure had memory. This was the one that took me longest to confirm and the one that I was most careful about, because the interpretation was the largest, and I did not want to make it until the evidence was sufficient. What I observed was this. When I repeated in action the same approach path, the same hand placement on the same surface location, the structure's response was different the second time than the first. Not in kind, but in magnitude. Smaller, more economical. The way a person's face changes less the second time you tell them a piece of news, because they have already incorporated it. The structure was learning from us, as we had been learning from it. At hour 3, Sarah caught my arm. Nora, look at the ground. I looked around the base of the structure, extending outward in a roughly circular pattern, a radius of perhaps 3 meters. The rock's surface had changed. The change was subtle. The color was slightly darker, the surface slightly smoother, the crack pattern slightly different. And when I crouched to examine it closely and ran my scanner across it, the crystalline ordering that characterized the structure itself was present in the surface rock. The ordering hadn't been there when we arrived. I had scanned this area on arrival. I had the data. The structure was growing at a rate that was, by any measure, impossibly fast for any inorganic crystalline process in any physical environment I had ever studied. It had extended its ordering into the surrounding rock, not its own material, the native basalt of the surface, and was transforming it, converting it, including it. Marcus, I said. He crouched beside me. He ran his scanner. He stood up and looked at the structure for a long time. This is not possible, he said. Not an argument, just a statement. The way you state that 2 + 2 = 4, because it is simply true. I know. Crystal structures do not grow by converting surrounding material of different composition. The thermodynamics alone. I know. The energy required to restructure basalt at this rate, in these thermal conditions. Marcus. I looked at him. Where do you think the energy comes from? He looked at me. He looked back at the structure. Very slowly. He looked at the sky, at the red dwarf star hanging low over the horizon. No, he said. That's not enough. The stellar flux at this distance from that star is completely inadequate to. What if been doing this for a long time? I said, what if this structure, this whatever it is not the source? What if this is just a component of something much larger, and the energy budget is distributed across a system we haven't fully mapped yet? He didn't answer, but he didn't argue either. At hour 4, Tomasz called from the Meridian. His voice had an urgency in it that made Sarah look up from her instrument panel and Hansa set down his scanner. "Nora," he said, "I've been running analysis on the full surface scan data we collected since orbit insertion, looking for the crystalline signature you described from the ground, and I found it." "Good," I said. "Where?" "Everywhere," he said. "Nora, it's everywhere. The entire subsurface geological composition of KX7, to a depth of approximately 12 kilometers based on ground-penetrating radar, shows the same crystalline ordering signature you're measuring at the structure. It's been there the whole time. We just didn't know what we were looking for." I said, "The whole planet," he said. "The structure you're standing next to is it's like a nerve ending, a sensory organ. The whole planet is the organism." The 4 of us on the surface stood in our white suits in the amber light in the slow subsonic pulse of KX. 7 went on beneath our feet. 1 beat every 2.1 seconds. And I thought about that. I thought about what it meant to be standing inside something rather than beside it, to have been, for the past month, in orbit above something that was not in it but a who, to have been receiving signals not from something on the planet, but from the planet itself. The whole enormous ancient patient thing, the 40,000-kilometer living crystal intelligence, thinking its slow thoughts in geological time and choosing, after whatever interval of observation had satisfied it, to reach out in the dark of space to the tiny metal seed it had detected in its sky. "It's been watching us for a month," Sarah said softly, "deciding whether to say hello." "It took 30 days to decide," Hansa said. "That's fast," I said. "For something thinking in geological time, 30 days is very fast." At 0300 hours ship standard, the signal came. I was standing at the base of the structure. I had sent Hansa and Marcus and Sarah back to the Ariadne 3 hours before. The 12-hour suit life had run down to a margin I wasn't comfortable ignoring, and I had stayed alone with fresh soup brought from the ship and a specific, clear, deliberate choice to be here when the signal began. It began differently from every other night. It did not begin with the 3-pulse header. It began with my name. Not spoken, not in English or any human language, expressed in the mathematical grammar that the signal had spent 30 nights teaching me to read, and my name was not a sound but a shape, a pattern, a specific arrangement of the relational symbols the signal had been building over 30 nights, a pattern that I recognized as referring to me specifically because it incorporated elements from my own analytical responses, the patterns I had made with my instruments and my annotations, the shape of my attention as it had moved through the previous signals. It had made me a symbol out of the traces of my own thinking. It said my name, and then it was quiet for a moment, the subsonic pulse continuing beneath my feet, and then it began. What it said to me in that transmission, I will not reproduce in full here, partly because the translation would fill a book, and partly because the experience of reading it was inseparable from the experience of being where I was, standing alone in the amber light on the surface of something ancient and alive, feeling it speak through the rock into the soles of my feet and through the antenna of my suit receiver simultaneously. I will say what I understood. It was alone. It had been alone for longer than the solar system we were sitting in had existed. It was older than the star it orbited, a fact I had to process several times before I could hold it. It had formed in the interstellar medium between stellar systems in an era so early in the universe's history that the elements available were different, the physical conditions were different, and the process by which it came to be what was bore no relationship to any process I could describe in a language of biochemistry or geology or any other science that applied the word life only to things that were built from carbon and water, and the specific chemistry of one small world around one medium star in the outer arm of one ordinary galaxy. It was not alone by species. It had encountered, over its vast history, 17 other intelligences of various kinds and origins, some biological in the carbon-water sense, some not, and the encounters had been what they had been, some brief, some extended, some mutually comprehensible, some not, and it had learned from each of them something that changed the architecture of its thinking, and it had been changed by those learnings the way a mind is changed by knowledge, in ways that could not be undone, in ways that were part of what it was now. We were number 18. It did not say this as a ranking. It said this as a location. This is where you are in the sequence of what has happened. This is the context. It had spent the 30 days since detecting the Meridian doing what it had done with all 17 previous encounters, observing, learning the specific shape of the intelligence it found, determining the most effective way to make contact. The nightly signals had been test transmissions, lessons, an educational sequence designed specifically for us, for human mathematical minds, for a particular way we thought and particular assumptions we carried. It had been reading us even as we read it. And tonight, 31 days after the Meridian had entered its sky, 8 hours after I had stood with my hand against its surface node and felt the pulse change, it had something specific to say. Not a warning, not a welcome, exactly. A question. I cannot render the question in English with any precision, because the question was embedded in a framework of concepts that English didn't have words for, concept about time and persistence and the nature of consciousness distributed across a planetary scale. But I can say what the question was approximately. It was asking about us, not about humanity in general, not about Earth or our history or our technology. About us, the 8 people in the metal vessel above it. Specifically, it wanted to know about something I had observed in our signals and in my annotations and in the way I stood at its surface and pressed my hand against it. It wanted to know about loneliness. It had detected loneliness in us, each of us, in specific and different forms. I will not catalog them here, because they were private to people who did not choose to share them with an alien intelligence, and I am still working out what it means that they did so inadvertently. And it wanted to understand it because loneliness was a concept it had worked on for a very long time and had never resolved. The biological intelligences it had encountered before had all shown it. This particular quality of mind that can reach toward other minds and not quite reach them, and it could model it mathematically, but it could not understand it, because it had never experienced it, being the whole planet, being the full extent of itself across every square kilometer of its surface and every depth of its geological interior. It had no self that was separate from itself, no edge where it ended and something else began, and the concept of mind that experienced itself as fundamentally separate, fundamentally alone in the universe, was one found both alien and fascinating, and I am using a word here that is my translation of something that has no English equivalent. Beautiful. It found our loneliness beautiful in a way that I had found the depressions in the surface beautiful, the way I had found the dead landscape beautiful, the beauty of something that was exactly what it was and nothing else. I stood there in the amber light, and I thought about this for a while. I thought about being alone in a universe that you have been alive long enough to watch form. I thought about being so entirely yourself, so entirely one thing without interior separation, that the concept of loneliness wasn't just absent but actively incomprehensible. I thought about which of those conditions was better, and then I stopped, because the question assumed a comparison that wasn't available. I answered it. I spoke into my suit recorder in English and let Aiko translate from the suit's transmission into the signal's mathematical grammar in real time, a process she had been developing for the past 3 hours based on the grammar I had painstakingly documented over 30 nights. The translation was imperfect. All translations are imperfect. But it was honest, and it was precise where it could be precise, and the structure's surface temperature rose by 2 degrees when I finished, which I had come to understand as something close to the signal for attention being registered. I said, "We experience loneliness because we are finite. We end. Each of us ends, and in the face of that ending we reach for others who will also end, and the reaching matters precisely because the time is limited. The loneliness is not a flaw in what we are. It is the shape of what we are, a mind that knows it will end, reaching through time for other minds that know they will end, making meaning in the reaching." I said, "I don't know if this is beautiful. I only know it is what I have." The pulse shifted again, slower this time, 1 beat every 5 seconds. Long and slow and patient. What it said in response, I will keep for myself. Not because it wasn't important. Because some things are for the person they are said to and not for anyone else. And in a life spent making everything I observed public and documented and available for peer review, this felt like the appropriate place to draw a line. We talked until sunrise. The ascent back to the Meridian was quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. Not the tight silence of unresolved tension, but the particular quiet of people who have been through something together and need the space inside their own heads to begin to sort through what it means. Sarah flew with her usual focus. Hanzo watched his instruments. Marcus sat beside me and stared at the surface of KX. 7 growing smaller through his porthole, and at some point over the first 30 minutes of Sen he said, without preamble, "I owe you an apology. You were doing your job." I said, "My job doesn't require me to be dismissive of a colleague. Your job does require you to push back on extraordinary claims. You did that. It's useful." He was quiet for a moment. "The planet is alive." "Yes. The planet is an organism, an intelligence. An organism implies biology, which is the wrong frame entirely. But yes, it's older than the star. Yes." He turned from the porthole to look at me directly. His face had the quality it sometimes had after a particularly significant geological finding, a quality I can only describe as a professional excitement of a person confronting something that is going to require them to rethink a great many things, the excitement and the exhaustion of it arriving simultaneously. "What does this mean?" he said. He made a gesture with his hand that seemed to encompass everything. The ship, the planet below, the star system, the 63 light years between us and Earth, all of human science. For everything. "I've been asking that for a month," I said. "I haven't finished answering it. Where do you start?" I thought about it. With the definition of life. That's the foundation. The definition of life is wrong. Not completely wrong, but incomplete in a way that has been systematically limiting the questions we were able to ask. We define life by the only example of it we knew. That's not science. That's natural history applied as physics. So we start there. We rebuild the definition from what we now know, which is that life is a process, not a material, that it requires duration and change and responsiveness to change, that it can be implemented in media we have never considered, that it exists on this planet. And if it exists here, then we have no principled reason to assume it doesn't exist in other places where we have been looking for the wrong things. I paused. This system has 7 other bodies. How many of them have we looked at with the right instruments? "None," he said, "because we were looking for biology." "Exactly." He was quiet for a long moment. "We're going to need more time here." "Yes," I said, "we're going to need a lot more time here." The Meridian was not a quiet place when we docked. Tomasz was running calculations on 3 screens simultaneously and talking to himself in a low, rapid Polish that he slipped into when his thinking was outpacing his English, which happened in direct proportion to how excited he was. Priya met us at the airlock with a medical scanner in one hand and a distinctly personal expression of relief, running quick biometric checks on each of us that I submitted to patiently while she checked my oxygen saturation and heart rate and made a small considering noise of the 42 hours I had now been awake. Aiko was at her console, replaying the full transmission record from the surface encounter, her headphones on and her face still with the focus of the best deep listening. And Captain Reyes was standing in the middle of the common room, waiting. He had not slept either. I could see it in the particular economy of his stillness, the way he was conserving energy while remaining alert, a quality I had seen in him at the end of difficult missions. He looked at me for a long moment as I came through the door with my suit half unsealed and my coffee-less hand not knowing where to put itself, and then he said, "How are you?" "Not quite the same as when I went down." I said, "Sit." I sat. He sat across from me. The others filtered around us, each finding their orbit. Hansa disappearing toward engineering, Marcus to his workstation, Sarah to the bridge. Tomasz did not look up from his screens. Priya set 2 cups of coffee on the table between me and Reyes, and then tactfully removed herself. "Tell me," Reyes said. I told him. All of it, in order, beginning with the walk and the depressions and the structure, through 4 hours of physical observation and measurement, through the transmission and the conversation at sunrise. I left nothing out, including the part at the end that I intended to keep private, telling him only that the final exchange had been personal and that I was keeping it, and he nodded without pressing me, because he was that kind of captain. When I finished, he drank his coffee. He looked at the surface of the table. He said, "What do you want to do?" "Stay," I said. "I want to stay. I want to go back down tomorrow and the next day. I want to bring Tomasz, and I want to bring Priya. I want to spend months here. Dario, I want to spend years here. There's an intelligence on that planet that has been alive since before the galaxy looked the way it looks, and it wants to talk to us. And I want to listen. We have a mission schedule. Our mission schedule does not account for this. No, he said. It doesn't. He set down his cup. I need to contact the agency. I know. Whatever I tell them will be seen by a great many people very quickly. I know. And once it's seen, there's no going back. I said, I know that too. I paused. There was never going to be a going back. The question is only what kind of forward we choose. He looked at me. What do you mean? I mean that what's down there doesn't change because we keep it secret or reveal it. It has been there since before humans existed. It will be there after whatever happens next. The question of what we do with what we know is entirely a human question, and the answer we get will say something about us, not about it. I stopped. I would rather we say something good. A long silence. Reyes picked up his coffee, found it empty, set it back down. Write me a full scientific report. Everything. Use your recordings. Use Marcus's geological data. Use Tomas's full planet scan analysis. Give me something I can transmit to the agency that will be taken seriously. How long do I have? He glanced at the ship's clock. 20 hours until the next transmission window. 20 hours. I'll need Aiko and Priya. You'll have them. I stood. My legs were less steady than I would have liked, but they were adequate. Dario. Nora. When we sent the Meridian out here, the mission brief said the system showed no signs of life, and we were here to confirm that assessment and move on. I remember the brief. Someone should tell them that their assessment was incorrect. The corner of his mouth moved. It was, for Reyes, a broad smile. I'll handle that part. The report took 19 hours and 40 minutes to write. I slept for exactly none of them. Aiko worked through the signal analysis, producing the cleanest and most rigorous mathematical documentation of the 31 nights of transmission that I could have hoped for, annotated with her own observations about the grammar's evolution across the sequence, which were sharp and occasionally better than mine. Priya worked through the biochemical implications of everything my instruments had recorded, approaching from the angle of her training. If this entity had the functional analogs of metabolism and responsiveness and adaptation, what did that imply about the definition of life in medical and biological terms? And the answer she arrived at, expressed in precise language of her discipline, was essentially what I had told Marcus on the way up, but with 20 pages of supporting evidence that I could not have produced myself. Marcus wrote his own geological section. He did not show it to me before submitting it to the report. When I read it incorporated in the full document, I saw that he had written it with a care and precision and a willingness to let the evidence lead where it led. That was everything I had believed him capable of, everything I had argued he was capable of on the 3 occasions during the past month when the tension between us had been highest. He ended his section with a sentence I have since quoted in every formal paper I have written. The appropriate response to evidence that challenges foundational assumptions is not the defense of those assumptions, but the expansion of the framework that generated them. Tomas's astrophysical analysis of the full planet crystalline signature was the longest section and the most technically dense, and it was also the part of the report that I suspected would have the most immediate impact on the scientific community, because it was empirical and instrument-based and produced by sensors that had been calibrated and cross-checked, and which no one could reasonably accuse of projecting pattern onto noise. He had found a signature on every surface scan of every part of KX-7. He had also, working backward to the dataset, found traces of the signature on scans of 2 other bodies in the system. Faint traces, much weaker, ambiguous. But there, if you knew what you were looking for, 2 other bodies. 7 in the system total. We had been looking at the wrong things. I wrote the introduction and the conclusion. The introduction was the hardest thing I have ever written, because it needed to do 2 things simultaneously that are in fundamental tension. It needed to be scientifically rigorous enough that no one could dismiss it on methodological grounds, and it needed to convey, to people who had not stood on the surface of KX-7 and felt the slow pulse under their feet, what it was like to discover that the universe was larger than we thought, not in distance, in kind. The conclusion was easier. I knew what I wanted to say. I said, we have operated for the entirety of our scientific history under the assumption that life, intelligence, and consciousness were features of biological organisms, carbon-based, water-dependent, temperature-sensitive, chemically specific. This assumption was not irrational. It was based on the only evidence available. Evidence was the point, and evidence was what we had lacked. We lack it no longer. I said, what we have found on KX-7 does not threaten what we know about biological life. It does not render our biology wrong. It renders it particular. We are one way that the universe has learned to think about itself. KX-7 is another. There may be others we have not yet found. And now that we know what to look for, we will find them. I said, the entity on KX-7 has been alone for a very long time in the sense that matters least. The physical sense, the absence of other bodies like itself. And not alone for a very long time in the sense that matters most, which is a sense of being part of a universe that has persisted through and observed and participated in and been changed by. We did not bring it company, but we brought it something. It told me what that something was. I am going to keep that information private, not because it is not important, but because it was said to me and it was personal. And I think the right to a private communication is something that applies to any intelligence, regardless of what it's made of. I said we should stay. We should send more people. We should bring everything we know and everything we are capable of learning, and we should stay as long as it takes, which may be longer than any individual human lifetime, because some conversations are worth having across generations. I said we are not alone. We have never been alone. We simply had not learned yet how to see who was with us. The transmission went at 0300 hours, 20 hours after we had returned from the surface, at the precise moment that KX-7's nightly signal began to arrive from below. I sat in the observation deck and received the signal and transmitted our report simultaneously, a symmetry that was probably accidental but which felt, in the amber-lit quiet of the deck, like the right way to do it. Aiko had her headphones on and was monitoring both streams. The rest of the crew was distributed around the ship in the positions they had settled into over the past 20 hours. Reyes in his quarters reviewing the report before transmission. Tomash at his screens. Marcus in geology lab with his samples. Sarah and Hansa in the small rec space that served as the Meridian's version of a common room. The signal was simple tonight. A single phrase in the mathematical grammar, brief and clear, which I translated in my head before Aiko could produce the formal version. Acknowledge, and then, you will return. Not a question, a statement. The calm, certain knowledge of a consciousness that had seen 17 previous encounters and understood the pattern of them. You will return. Perhaps not these 8 people in this ship. Perhaps others, younger, carrying the record of what we had found and coming with more instruments and more languages and more time. But return, because now we knew where to look and what to look for, and that knowledge, once acquired, does not go backward. You will return. Below me, through the observation deck's viewport, KX-7 rotated, gray-brown and cracked and dead-looking in every way that a cursory scan could confirm, every way that a quick assessment could support, every way that the old framework for thinking about life could see, and alive in every way that mattered. Alive in the rock and the crystal ordering and the slow geological heartbeat that I could feel even from orbit if I held still enough and paid attention, which was perhaps the lesson and the simplest thing I had learned on this entire mission, the thing I would carry longest after I had processed everything else. Pay attention. Hold still. Let the thing you're looking at be what it is rather than what you expect. I pressed my hand against the viewport glass, toward the planet, in what I knew was a gesture so human it bordered on embarrassing, and which I made anyway because I was human, and this is what we do. The surface of KX-7, 237 kilometers below me, received no signal from my hand. The gesture was purely for me, and yet the subsonic pulse, which Tomasz had confirmed was measurable even from orbit if you knew the frequency, and you set your instruments to find it, shifted just slightly, just enough to measure, not in response to my gesture. That would be too much. But in the ongoing course of its attention, the vast, slow planetary awareness that had been observing us for 31 days and talking to me for one night, it shifted. And whatever that shift meant in its terms, in my terms it felt like the particular attention that passes between two things that have seen each other truly. I took my hand away from the glass and picked up my cold coffee and began to write my personal log, which would not be part of any transmitted report, which would stay in my private archive until I decided what to do with it, which might be a very long time. I wrote, Day 31 in orbit above KX-7. We are staying. Reyes has already begun drafting a request to the agency for extended mission authorization, and the report we sent will make that request difficult to deny. We don't know how long we'll be here. I don't know how long I'll be here personally. That uncertainty would have frightened me 31 days ago. I wrote, "It doesn't frighten me now. The thing on this planet has been persistent for a span of time that makes the age of human civilization look like a breath. And it's spent that time learning and changing and waiting, and it is not done. I don't know if I am not done either. I don't know what not done looks like for me, from here, but I intend to find out." I wrote, "The signals have been going out from KX-7 for longer than I can calculate, and they will go out after I am gone, into the dark between stars, into the silence of systems no one has mapped. And someday, some vast span of time from now, some other mind will pick them up and begin to learn the grammar and will sit in the amber light of some distant observation deck and feel the excitement and the terror of understanding arriving all at once. And the planet will wait for them, patient, certain, alive in the only way that matters, which is persistently, which is changeably, which is in response to whatever the universe offers. We are not alone. We never were. I think we always knew." This story was brought to you by HSY Stories. Subscribe to our channel and be the first to experience every new story.